today. The title of this workshop is Global Internet-Related Public Policies. Is there an institutional gap? And I'd like to give you a little bit of background information, and then I'll pass the microphone to the speakers. Well, paragraph 60 of the Tunis Agenda acknowledges that there are many cross-cutting international public policy issues that require attention. To fill this gap, the agenda provides for the establishment of the Internet Governance Forum and also of a process of enhanced cooperation. UN General Assembly decision from 2010 has stated that enhanced cooperation and the convening of the Internet Governance Forum are to be persuaded by the Secretary General through two distinct processes and recognizes that the processes should be complementary in some way. So there are two very important discussions about institutional frameworks taking place right now. One is going on in the CSTD, the Commission on Science and Technology for Development, about IGF improvement. And the second one is taking place about enhanced cooperation in UNDESA in New York. And the main goal of the improving the IGF is to link it to the broader dialogue on internet governance. And because these two processes are taking place in different fora and also in different places, one is the meetings of the working group take place in Geneva, and the meetings about enhanced cooperation take place in New York. There is a disconnection between the two topics, and one of the goals that we have here is try to connect them. What does a process has to do with the other, and how can we see them both together in a coherent manner? Well, to structure this session, we have come up with some questions. I would like to divide the questions in two blocks. And the first block, we will address two main issues. The first one, what are the main policy and regulatory issues that are not being sufficiently addressed by the existing bodies? And the second question would be, what should be the main role of a mechanism of enhanced cooperation? And of course, this question entails a definition of what enhanced cooperation is for each of us that are going to speak here. I would like to give the speakers some time, about 3 or 4 minutes for them to express their ideas, open the floor for questions. We're going to take questions for about 30 minutes, and then we're going to go to the second block of questions that will be more specific on institutional options. So, who would like to start? Paninder, could you?
If you want me to. Thank you, Marilia. The first question is what kind of institutional gaps one may think exist today in the global internet policy making space. For this, the first distinction I would like to make is between technical policy making and day-to-day operation of the internet and larger public policy issues involving social, cultural, economic, political issues. Now, this distinction was very clearly made in the Tunis agenda, but most of our discussions confuse these two issues a lot. Every time, and I'm concerned about the public policy issues, and whenever I go to a meeting and start talking about the gaps, what needs to be done, almost all responses I get from the other side of the floor are about the technical policy-making regime. And then obviously the discussion goes nowhere because the two sides are talking about two different things. So first of all, I would like to say that in technical policy making and the day-to-day operation of the internet, there are no huge institutional gaps, I think. However, there is a need for better public interest-based oversight, which is democratic, in a very small, non-intrusive, backstopping kind of a manner, in the way, for example, U.S. Department of Commerce does it in a non-democratic fashion for the whole world. And otherwise, the general institutional infrastructure, the system in this area is found satisfactory by most people. And that's not the problem. So now let's not frame that as the problem. But what the problem is about public policy in social, economic, cultural, and political areas. And the examples are so many that one wonders whether one should start on giving examples because it looks limiting. It's about everything. Everything like Google decides, as the keeper of the world's knowledge, decides to keep on tweaking its search engine algorithm without nobody ever knowing what are the public interest implications of it. We don't know Facebook is very enthusiastic about certain revolutions and less enthusiastic about certain other movements. And what kind of things get done behind the scene. And there's just no public interest oversight, there's no transparency. There are bigger issues like internet and intellectual property. There are issues of internet and trade. When we download applications, is any local tax get paid at the point of downloading, or all the taxes are paid at the point where the application originates, which is in the north mostly? So, and this list is unending, but it seems that people are not very convinced that there are those issues. And the last point I will make, because I know we need to get through the first round quickly, is that if you want to know whether there are any real public policy issues which needs to be addressed, go and see the functioning of OECD's Committee on Information and Computer Policies, or it's a name something like that. Go and look at COE's work in this area, and you would know that by the month, they come up with new frameworks, new kind of policy guidelines, a new kind of suggestions, new questions in the public policy area. Because if they have public policy areas, is obviously these public policy areas are also relevant for the rest of the world. And first of all, we need to agree that there is a huge amount of public policy issues which needs to be addressed at a global level, and then we can come down to how to address them. Thank you, Marilia.
Thank you, Parminder. I'd like to give the floor now to Marcus Kummer, Vice President of Public Policy from ISAC.
Thank you, Marilia. When I read the description of the workshop, I felt it's very easy. I go there and say, no. The answer to the question is no, in my view. Having listened to Parminder, I think it may be useful to go back to the discussions we had in the working group on internet governance between the two phases of the summit, where we agreed there is an institutional gap on the global scale, where we have to address all these issues related to social, cultural, economic areas. But we then also recognize for most of these fields, there are specialized organizations in place, and they do exist. And when we then proposed as a working group on internet governance to come up with a new space for public policy dialogue, the IGF, it was the clear understanding that the IGF would not take over any issue. Yes, IPR, I totally agree with Parminder that this is one of the key issues. I prefer actually calling it digital content, as it's, we in ISOC we've started putting that in our program, and I like calling it digital content and innovation, because innovation does not necessarily need to be protected by copyright or intellectual property rights, but it can also be done on a shared Creative Commons platform. And we as an internet community reacted quite strongly when in the OECD framework, IPR was put forward as almost the sole source of innovation. We said, no, it's the internet, it's the key to innovation. So I don't have any substantive problem here. But we're talking about the institutional framework, and there's no need to set up a new organization dealing with these issues, and B, there will be no political will to set up a new body dealing with issues on internet and IPR or internet and trade, because there are well-established organizations. So the question is more, how do we carry what we discuss here into these organizations? And quite often they have their own system. I am no expert on IPR. I've never even been to a meeting of the World Intellectual Property Organizations, but I'm told it's very strongly dominated by the copyright holders. So the question is, how can we, from our discussions in the IGF framework, give messages to these discussions taking place in the IPR? And by sheer coincidence, not sheer coincidence, planned to attend that workshop yesterday on IPR, which was co-organized between ISOC and WIPO. And I thought that was an excellent workshop because it brought exactly all the different perspectives of these issues on the table. And this is basically the way forward, that we bring in the different perspectives to the existing organizations. A last word on democratic oversight over the technical organizations. All these policy development processes on, be that on standards, be that on IP addressing, be that on DNS, are done in an open fashion. Everybody who wants to attend and can contribute to these processes. So I can't see why there should be, I mean, yes, I take it, Parminter talked about a light oversight, but I can't see why there should be oversight over a process that is as open as it is. If you are interested in developing standards, go to an IETF meeting. If you are interested in policy development on allocation of IP addresses, go to a meeting of the regional internet registries. And if you are interested in the DNS, in the administration of the domain name system, attend an ICANN meeting, and you can make your voice heard. And I think the ICANN has a lot of criticism is focused on ICANN, but I would maintain that the recent meeting in Singapore on the new GTLDs, that the ICANN system was more reflective of the public interest than the governments would have been. The governments wanted a more restrictive system, and that was very strongly dominated or influenced by the trademark owners, whereas the ICANN board listened to the other stakeholders and took into account also the other interests. And that is, I think, a very good example how within the internet community decisions can be made listening to all the stakeholder groups. The development of the new GTLDs was a long and drawn out process. It has many criticisms, but I think in the end, the whole ICANN community came out of it strengthened. That would be my point of view. I know others may have a different point of view, but this is my, thank you.
Thank you very much, Marcus. I'd like to give the floor now to Tulika Pandey, Director of the Department of Information Technology from the Government of India. Tulika.
Thank you, Marilia. Talking after Marcus, who has actually been the initiators of an open and inclusive forum like the Internet Governance Forum, it's not going to be easy for me to speak just a little bit away from what he's already stated, that there's no need for another institutional or another mechanism or another UN body to fill up the gaps that exist today. I wouldn't speak too much, but on behalf of my country and my people, there are just a few that I felt were not fully being addressed within the IGF ambit. And I go back to the Tunis agenda and just mention those few that we feel could be better addressed if there was a slightly more organized or more focused structure or a body that could look into these issues that need to be addressed urgently, since the internet today has become one of the fuel for socioeconomic growth of economies across the world. And the first one that I would like to refer to is 72B, where the Tunis agenda states that the IGF needs to facilitate discourse between bodies dealing with different cross-cutting international public policies regarding the internet and discuss issues that do not fall within the scope of any existing body. While this was a mandate expected to be covered by the Internet Governance Forum. There is no denial that there have been open, free, and inclusive deliberations within the IGF, but where have they led to? What do we have as a takeaway from these open, free discussions and deliberations that we have had within the IGF? We seek to have something more concrete as a takeaway on this para 72B, which for many countries is not so clear or transparently available. The next one is para 72C, interface with appropriate intergovernmental organizations and other institutions on matters under their purview. I have not been able to understand the process or even an informal mechanism available within the IGF discussions, which has allowed us to have direct interactions with these intergovernmental bodies who have sat down around the table with us to state what they have taken away from the IGF deliberations on the issues that come under their purview, and to come back to say this is how we have responded to the issues that have emerged, and this is where we have taken measures to mitigate or to respond to the issues that were felt not fully covered or not fully addressed by our mechanisms of management of the internet resources. (72F) Strengthen and enhance the engagement of stakeholders in existing and or future internet governance mechanisms, particularly those for developing countries. I'm fully aware that the efforts in the IGF to reach out to the developing economies and countries has been a great success. But where has it led to? How do we measure that there has been an enhanced engagement or there has been a strengthening of the stakeholders in these developing economies vis-a-vis the IGF having reached out or outreached to these nations? I do not see how the current IGF structure or the processes would allow us to be able to even informally gather this information and put forth a percentage or some form of discourse stating that this is where we stand today. The only thing that we see is a number or percentage of the participation of the developing world in the IGFs. Is that the real measure of strengthening and enhancement of the engagement with the stakeholders? I'm not sure this could completely ally with that. There are a few more, but I'm sure these are the few major ones which I wanted to bring to attention of my eminent panelists along with me here and all of you who are sitting to attend and participate in this. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Tulika. Well, before I give the floor to the next speaker, there is only a small observation I would like to make. I think that these two processes that we have commented on the beginning, the process for IGF improvement and the process for enhanced cooperation, in my view, what differentiates greatly both processes is that enhanced cooperation has to do with a forum for making decisions. And I think that it has to be clear when we talk about both issues. Do we need a forum to make decisions? Which is the role of this forum? And this is something I would like our next speakers to also address. And having said that, I'd like to give the floor to Andrea Glorioso from the European Commission.
Thank you, Marilyn. I'm Andrea Glorioso from the European Commission. Apologies for the tone of my voice, but it's Friday morning, and yesterday there was a great party by our friends at Diplo, so I'm afraid I didn't have time to recover full enough, but I would just like, if that's okay for the chair, I would just like to react very briefly to some of the points that were made by previous speakers and to try to answer again briefly, because I know the time is at premium, to some of the questions that were raised. So Parminder made a reference, which I think is a key reference that is not discussed enough, about this difference between the technical day-to-day running of the internet and public policy issues. The European Commission has repeatedly, on a number of occasions, both through official communications, so formal statements by the Commission as a whole, through speeches. You might have heard the keynote speech of Vice President Nelly Kroes during the opening session. We have repeatedly made it clear that as a public authority, we are not interested at all to enter into or to regulate into the day-to-day technical management of the internet. That is something that should be left to the private sector or to the technical community, if there is any difference between the two. But anyway, it's not a job for the public authorities. However, something that we noticed is that very often decisions which might appear as purely technical have actually deep public policy implications. Without wanting to bore people, but just to make one example, there is now a big discussion, which has been ongoing for some time actually, about, I think it's called the Resource Public Infrastructure, or RPKI, which is about building a secure infrastructure for exchanging routing information for the internet, which is fantastic, because as we saw, for example, during the Pakistani YouTube incident a few years ago, the routing infrastructure on the internet is not as secure as it should be. However, these kind of technical discussions raise important public policy questions. If you build a secure infrastructure which needs to have a centralized cryptographic key management, again, I don't want to enter into the details, then the question is who controls those central keys, which kind of power is given to those who control that key. And these are the kind of questions that the technical community, the business community, etc., are not, according to us, do not seem to be very, with all due respect, either not very willing or not very well prepared to address. And some of you might know, at least the Europeans or those who follow European affairs, might know that RIPE NCC, which is the regional internet registry for the European region, plus I think Middle East and Russia, had recently discussed the introduction of this particular secure system into the RIPE region. And there was a proposal, everything seemed to go right. Then one person asked this simple question that I'm making: who in the end controls the keys, the cryptographic keys that are necessary to operate the system? And all hell broke loose, because RIPE NCC, the technical community that is a part of RIPE, did simply not seem to have ever questioned this important point. And this caused the whole technical proposal to be dropped, which was very unfortunate, because this was an important technical proposal. So if the public policy question had been asked beforehand, and quite frankly, public authorities had involved themselves or had been involved, because let's be frank, it's not always easy for public policy, for public authorities getting involved into the day-to-day discussion on the internet, because we agree that's not something we should do. But if there had been a better involvement, I think that this problem might have been solved. So the first message I take from this is that whenever we talk about whether it's announced cooperation, whether it's a forum like the IGF, it has to be clear that there can be no artificial separation between the issues, and that we need all to understand that even issues that appear to be merely technical or purely technical can, not necessarily do, but can have public policy implication. And let's say the public authorities should probably be try to participate more, but the technical community, especially what is called the technical community, should also try to understand that if we want to participate, it's not because we want to control, because we want to regulate, but because perhaps we have a little bit more experience on the political issues, on the public policy issues that can arise. The second point that I wanted to raise is concerning what my esteemed colleague, and I like to think friend, Markus Kummer, mentioned about the openness of most of the processes, of discussion processes, in some case decision-making processes that revolve around the Internet, the Internet Engineering Task Force, ICANN, RIPE, other regional Internet registries. It is true, these meetings are open, and the discussion process, I'm not so sure about the decision-making process, but the discussion process is certainly very open, and I can easily accept. It's usually more open than you normally find in traditional intergovernmental settings. That is true. Having said that, oversight, which does not mean regulation, but oversight is very often necessary in order to ensure that openness does not become, you don't confuse an appearance of openness when in fact only the usual suspects talk. Only those that have 10, 15 years of experience in this field talk, and the newcomers who might have some good ideas are simply discouraged from making these ideas heard. And I would like respectfully to note that concerning the Singapore decision of ICANN, the ICANN board certainly has listened to a number of stakeholders besides the Governmental Advisory Committee, which is in their right, seeing that the chair of the ICANN board has gone to work for a company which is bound to make a lot of money out of the new generic top-level domain. A few days after the decision was taken, while he was chair of the board, one questions which kind of stakeholders he was listening to. And I think this is a point to be made because openness is fantastic, but there also had to be clear rules in place to avoid conflict of interest, to ensure accountability, and to ensure transparency. And this is something which, as you may know, the European Commission is extremely worried about. Yes, we are almost done, yes. Last point that I wanted to make is I just wanted to answer one of the questions which I think was raised. Do we need more bodies, etc.? Personally, and I mean, I would even say the Commission does not think that we need more bodies. I was on Wednesday at a very interesting workshop called Mapping Internet Governance, in which several attempts at mapping the different institutions that deal with internet governance-related issues or internet-related issues was presented. Frankly, I think, I mean, I'm kind of joking, but we have even too many institutions at the moment. What we need is a much better way of coordinating and outreach to the institution. On this, I agree with my esteemed Indian colleague that there is a clear mandate for the IGF to help in this process, and that mandate has to be fully fulfilled. We do not want, with the Commission, we are happy with the IGF for its basic structure, non-decisional body, but its full mandate has to be fulfilled. On that, there is no possible discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andrea. Well, Andrea just made a statement that I think that many of us has comments upon. The IGF should not be a decision-making body. The question is, do we need a decision-making body? Which body should be it? What is the structure of this body? And I would like to give the floor to Romulo Neves so he could address these questions and if he can, focus on these specific topics. Thank you.
I can't. But I try. Well, just some few words before trying to address Marily's question. Oh, there's no gap when one talks about power distribution or legitimacy distribution. Somebody, someone, somewhere is filling in this gap. This is, for me, is just clear as water, clean water. There is institutional dysfunction, let's say, or institutional inequality. Maybe it's better. So when you talk about, having said that, when you talk about institutional framework, we probably are talking about public policies. And related to public policies, I would like to talk about task. Is the first thing we need to think when we talk about public policy. The decision process and the funding. These three elements make the public policy path and process possible. When I talk about tasks, what would be the tasks within the related to internet governance? It depends on the stakeholder we're talking about. For example, and within the different groups of stakeholders, within those groups, there are different tasks. Let's say governments, we could say some of them would like to increase access. Some of them would like to increase control and regulation. Some of them would like to avoid political dysfunctions. just like Andrea said. When you talk about companies, maybe some of them would like to increase access. Probably most of them would like to have profit, maybe 100%. And some of them would like to increase, or most of them would like to increase freedom to the private business. When you talk about the civil society, relate to users, because civil society is almost everything. But when we are talking about users, we could talk about those tasks: increasing access, also increased freedom of those citizens related to internet usage. When you talk about academy, maybe increase clarity within the internet governance process. When you talk about the technical community, I think maybe some of them would like to increase access. Most of them would like to increase stability. And maybe 100 of them would like to prompt and widespread patterns and patternization. Well, this, when we talk about tasks, we can find within this forest all these different meaning to the word. When you talk about decision related to those tasks, each one of those tasks means different decisions and sometimes opposite decisions. But maybe we can find a common point, common element among all the stakeholders. I think it's increasing access, I think. But let's make it, let's leave it to the discussion. Just 2 minutes. 1 minute, okay. Okay. So what is the Brazilian government? Sorry?
I said the civil society controlling the government functions.
Well, how is about the decision making, the legitimacy distribution of power? How, in the Brazilian government point of view, how it's distributed right now? I think in this as follows. First of all, private companies have more power, have more legitimacy here, than, not here, but in the internet governance process, than governments. And by the way, governments have more power, more legitimacy than civil society. What would be the Brazilian government tasks? And I can say by my ministry and probably by on behalf of the entire Brazilian government. To overcome dysfunctions in the distribution of legitimacy here in the internet governance process, increase participation. It includes internal participation on the process. It's why we adopted a very successful multi-stakeholder model, and increase access. It means we need some dysfunctions to solve, and how can we put this forward? How could we put redistribution of legitimacy, access increasing, and increasing in participation on the stage? Maybe we need another body, but maybe we can forward some evolutions in the existing bodies. We don't have the response, but I would like to put it into discussion. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Romulo. I know it's not fair when you are not speaking on your native language. I'm going through the same thing here. So you need more time to express yourself. But having said that, I would like to give the floor to the next and last speaker, Jova Kumbalia. And I'd like to make a question. Maybe you can build on that. Yesterday we had a very interesting panel organized by Bildray. We discussed the role of plurilateral or minilateral arrangements that are making decisions or developing policies and standards on internet governance. And we discussed if they are a good thing or if they are a bad thing, if they are contributing to the global governance or if they are creating these silos of decision making and we are fragmenting governance of the internet. How could you comment that?
Marilia, it is a difficult question after party night which we can see based on our voices that it was a party knife at the IGF and attendance this morning. That I'll answer this question through one anecdote and explanation what we are doing with our building under construction. Just two snapshots. Anecdote is from Geneva, and from comment that I received from one ambassador at the reception, well-experienced ambassador who follows the overseas issues. And when we discussed what I'm doing and what I'm involved in, then he said, why do you need to write these IG books and to do these drawings? He said that he recently attended one briefing, and for him it was very clear. The IGF internet should be managed by those who are in charge of cables, and he indicated ITU, and those who are in charge of content, it's UNESCO. And well, I said those two organizations are playing extremely important role in internet governance, but it is much more complex. And I tried to introduce a bit of complexity, but it didn't fly. He tried to reduce complexity, and you can understand busy ambassador from small states in Geneva, which has to cover in the morning human rights, in the afternoon humanitarian issues, in trade and internet governance, with all its complexity comes to the forefront. This anecdote is a good example of, if we can call it, perception and reality. And perception is powerful in policy, and that we have to address more and more if we want to create a really powerful internet governance system. Back to your question, what are we going to do with the silos? You know our famous internet governance building. We realized that building has to be a bit reconstructed. It was under heavy construction when we designed it in 2004. And there are two ideas that we add: two elevators, two lifts on each side. One elevator should overcome this silos effect, which exists between floors: infrastructure, legal, economic, socio-cultural, and development. And the other elevator on the other side should introduce values, because it seems people commented that there is a lack of values and discussion on values in the current values. It means openness, transparency, inclusiveness, and other issues that we have been mentioning, but not introduced operationally. When I ask colleagues about their motivation, why we should do that, and motivation is centered around two elements. One is that governments are back. After the strong bashing against governments in early part of our century, in the 90s, governments are back, especially after financial crisis. In the United States, European Union, everywhere, and they want to play more prominent role. And it is, I think, the constant that we will have in the forthcoming period, that governments will try to extend their footprint in the internet, not only in internet policy, in financial market, in other policies, and that has to be kept in mind. The second element, which is extremely important in creating this infrastructural balance, is that in the same time we are also facing limits of the global solutions. We are facing it in climate change. We haven't had recently any major global treaty. And there is more and more realizing that you have to empower people, bottom-up initiatives in the field of governance, what I call Joe Kali solutions here in Kenya. People who are fixing cars on the roads, who put their ingenuity, their ideas, their inventions in the way of sorting out their problems. Therefore, our challenge in the new building that we are designing, and probably in the internet governance process, is how to find a more prominent place for governments, and in the same time, how to avoid situation of having very complex top-down solutions through the classical multilateral instruments, in order to keep vitality which is coming from the bottom, and which has been characteristics both of the internet and internet governance forum, among other things. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jovan. I'd like to open the floor, and I'd like to take 3 questions. I'd ask you to be brief, because we have to go to the next part of our session. And on the next part of our session, I'm sure that we will address some recent issues that have come up, such as IPSA recommendations and the compact from the European Commission. So it will be an interesting session. I see 3 hands, one over there, one over here. Oh, Ron, please. It was the first one to raise his hand.
Thank you, Marilia. In yesterday's workshop about the different governance frameworks for internet governance, I mentioned that as Jovan just said, that the internet governance landscape is so complex that, well, that is why in the wiki we had an expert from Singapore of complex system and chaos. So I'm not saying that this is chaotic, but it's so complex that, like some other areas that is complex, like for instance innovation systems, that is why it now is academically are introducing the concept of ecology, the concept of biological ecology to these complex systems, because the concept of ecology, it precisely understands that there are many different actors, many different processes, and sometimes those are linked, but that the linkage is not completely understood or known. So I think that the system of internet governance should be considered an ecosystem of internet governance in which there's multiplicity of actors, multiplicity of processes, and of course multiplicity of decisions and governance and policy that will have to be enacted. And as one panelist said, it's part of this ecosystem of the complexity that it's very difficult to differentiate technical from policy matters and the processes in which they are conducted to actual implementation. I think that we should acknowledge that complexity. I think the IGF, in a way, maps that, relates to that complexity. That's why the IGF itself is so complex. But I think that the question that I have for the panelists is that in order to that complexity actually deliver results, task-oriented policy results or whatever, there have to be some sort of guideline, some map, something that tries to extract, for instance, the anecdote that you said is the extreme of trying to find the extreme simplicity in that complexity. Of course, that's the extreme case, but at least there should be some path to extract results from that complexity. Marcus mentioned that one way is how the results, for instance, of this forum, the IGF, should go to the existing institutions. But and to end, I think that internet governance, because of complexity, it will have to be governed by multiple institutions. You could never have only one. And also, it's unrealistic to say that the existing institution will go away or will cede their mandate. But the key thing is how the results of this complex discussion, as Marcus said, could get into their process in a natural and maybe not in a such voluntarily way. Because now we are talking in the IGF to the world of institutions, but are they listening? Or they should listen? Or say somebody must say in writing that they should listen? I think those are the questions.
Thank you very much, Juan. I'll give the floor to Anya. We only have a space for 3 people. So, and next over there, and Anya.
It's a question following up in a way from the earlier speaker. I think there's 2 strands to this debate. One is about whether or not there should be more oversight. The other question is...
You introduce yourself.
Oh, I'm really sorry. Anya Kovac from the Internet Democracy Project in India. So one is the question of public oversight. The other question is of where that oversight should be located then. And I find it really interesting listening to these conversations how there is talk about fragmentation and silos, while of course in other areas of government what is here called fragmentation one calls decentralization, and then all of a sudden it becomes something positive. I'm really trying to understand these debates, so this is a genuine question, but I would be really grateful if the representatives of governments in particular, so including the European Union, could comment on whether they also see possibilities on having greater oversight but keeping the decentralized system intact. Because I think a lot of the unease that has been there with some of the proposals is about a feeling of centralization. So I'm wondering, I would like to hear your comments on whether there is an in-between possibility as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I forgot your name, sorry.
It's Chris Buckridge from the RIPE NCC. Sorry, at first I'd just like to agree with what Marcus has said about the technical communities and the open forums there. I wanted to just address some of Andrea's comments, the European Commission's comments, about the inability or unpreparedness of some of these existing decision-making bodies to address public policy-related issues. And just as RIPE NCC, I'll hone in on the sort of specific case of RPKI, which you mentioned. As someone who's been involved in the communication surrounding that, it's certainly been a frustrating and chaotic process, but I think it's not a failure of the system that the community has not yet reached a policy on that. I think rather it's a success, and it shows the success of the consensus-based process in that even at what was a very late stage, or what many people thought was a late stage in that policy development and agreement process, a single voice or several voices actually raising a significant concern were able to prevent that and to make the community go back and say, okay, we need to rethink this, we need to look at this, because there are possibly significant public policy implications. As I say, it's a very specific point, I realise, but I think it also goes to a larger point about maybe some misunderstanding of the strengths that the existing forums have. And something like the IGF is a good place where stakeholder groups can come together and hopefully educate each other about the strengths that their processes have. So I guess that's my point.
Thank you very much, Chris. I'd like now to go to the second round of questions, and I'd like to, sorry? Oh, please, I'm really sorry. There was a direct question for you, and if anyone wants to address the comments that have made by Anya. Sorry,
Thank you.
Very early in the day, last day.
Yes, no, I sympathize with that. I will try to be extremely brief. First, with Chris, with the RIPE NCC, and I'm sure we can discuss it in more detail bilaterally. If I may make a quip, a joke, it is striking to me that when in the technical community there is a one last-minute objection to a process that brings the whole process to a halt, as happened with RPKI, that's a success. When, as happened in ICANN, the GAC arrives perhaps a bit late, perhaps, although we made the point repeatedly, arrives a bit late, claiming that there are problems with the decision, then that's a failure of the GAC. So it seems to me that there are a bit of double standards here in this whole multi-stakeholder discussion. And again, quite frankly, coming from a public administration, I can't see how spending 1 year of discussion and then arriving at the end and not being able to achieve a decision because certain issues were not addressed at the beginning can be considered a success. If I said that to my superiors, I would be thrown out of the window, honestly. But fine, maybe we don't understand that well the process involved. There is my Deputy Director General there that is laughing, so I'm sure that he can agree with my point. Yes, I would be thrown out of the window, yes. Very briefly on the point made by the Cuban gentleman, I understand, on the internet governance as an ecology. I have to say that I kind of started to dislike the use of these metaphors, ecology, etc. You have a right point, you have a good point there. I think we should try to be a bit more pragmatic. Fine, it's an ecology, then what, as you yourself ask, then what should we do of it? Again, I reiterate, the workshop that we have on Wednesday on mapping internet governance was very productive, and knowing where decisions are taken, who is involved in those decisions, how can people participate in those fora, which are very, very many. And as I made the point on the workshop on Wednesday, I was a speaker there, many of the fora where decisions which are related to the internet are taken do not have the name internet written in it, do not have apparently anything to do with the internet, and yet relevant decisions are taken there. And I think that knowledge is the first step. We need to know where those decisions are taken. And I would encourage you to contact the organizers of that workshop, which are launching this initiative to build a through a multi-stakeholder process, a map of internet governance. They need help, which we will try to give as well. Very last point from the lady from the Internet Democracy Project. India, yeah. Okay. Yes, it is possible to have decentralization and oversight. I don't see what is the problem with that, but maybe I didn't quite understand your question. The point of decentralizing doesn't mean that you give carte blanche that you give a blank check to whomever you're decentralizing to. You're giving certain specific functions, or we are accepting that certain specific functions are performed by specific organizations which are perhaps technically better suited. It doesn't mean that from the perspective of a public authority, you just raise your hands and say, well, from now on, you can do whatever you want. We still maintain on public policy issues, on application of law and enforcement of law, we still maintain our power, and that has to be absolutely clear, because if that is not the case, this is a real problem for democracy, honestly. And it is not what decentralization ever meant. Thanks for your patience.
I'd like to, Anya.
Just one clarification. The question came, among other things, from your comment that there were too many institutions at the moment.
I have to say that was a kind of a ironical comment. But honestly, if you ever been, as I'm sure you have, involved in international discussions, I'm sure you start to count the number of organizations, sub-organizations, committees, subcommittees, etc. You can ask yourself, well, should we maybe try to simplify a little bit the whole environment?
Okay, I'd like to ask the panelists if they have their burning comments, do it now, otherwise wait for the next round. Please, Marcos.
A small comment. I agree with much what was being said. We are not against governments. We do understand we have to work with governments. Governments are, of course, important, but we want to do it within the existing institutions. And I think Andrea made the comment that, yes, maybe we should get involved even a little bit more. Maybe they should have been involved a little bit earlier in these right discussions I have not followed. But in ICANN, it is more structured through the GAC, and I fully take it that there is room for improvement on this collaboration. But I know many governments, for instance, participate or send representatives to the Internet Engineering Task Force, where you, through standards, influence the deep architecture of the Internet. So it is important that governments take part of these discussions. And I agree with what was said that seemingly technical decisions can have public policy aspects. But let's have these discussions in the relative bodies that deal with these issues. And I, for one, agree with my friend Juan. We like the word ecosystem because we thrive together, and each organization has its different role. And just today's Economist, I don't know whether you have read it, has a leader article on internet governance and also quite a lengthy article on this IGF. And the leader says internet governance in praise of chaos.
Thank you, Marcos. Tulika?
I have a very small comment, and this is in response to Marilia's question on whether or not we need a decision-making body. Yesterday I was attending a session workshop on scenarios, the future scenarios of internet. And there was this one very interesting presentation. And there were these 4 scenarios that were presented. One, policy reform, so a regulated market. That was one scenario that was proposed. The second that was mentioned was an unregulated market scenario. The third was a VIP net scenario where you had issues on net neutrality to be addressed. And the last was the internet commons scenario. If these are the scenarios that we are looking at in the future of the internet, I'm sure that decision making is mostly public. While we sit together to form standards and we sit together to bring out technologies in various forms, it is the public which actually decides where the internet demand would go, what would be the future of internet. And therefore, the decision making is more pluralistic than what we have been mostly discussing to be more not so plural in its decision. This is the only observation that I wanted to bring forth, that it is the market that will decide the future of internet, and not us sitting in these committees and forming the standards and technologies that will bring up. Thank you.
Very fast, Anya. I think fragmentation is a very different thing of decentralization. And the question is that openness for integration in a participative manner with decentralization, but avoiding fragmentation? It's a hard question, but we believe, and we are trying to say yes, and we are trying to build this kind of proposal. And I'd like to use Juan's analogy with map. Maybe governments should not only to try to read a map, but to propose a three-dimensional map integrating the multiple organizations, the multiple paths of outcomes, and maybe the roles. This would be a very good contribution.
Yes. Again, on this issue of fragmentation and decentralization, and I think Anya's comment does come from decentralization, which India is doing so well, but decentralization takes place within an institutional framework. Decentralization does not mean that the village sets up their own committees and do whatever, and you know what happens when they do set up those committees and do whatever. It's a tight, clear institutional framework. One of the biggest thing is the distribution of power is always tracked. Everybody's discussing every time where the power lies, and the decentralization is with that distribution of power. And when we have spoken of fragmentation, and I saw some people, kind of treat as if OECD's policy making and other bodies is silos. They are not silos. The problem is that they are not silos. The policy making may take place in small spaces, but it impacts all others who are not involved in that policy making. So I know, as Tulika said, public should take the decisions, and I think nobody in the room disagrees with that. But how would public take those decisions is the issue we are talking about. And if we are keen on tracking power, where does the power lie right now? Who are not empowered, who are not able to participate. If we are very keenly tracking that and not lost just in the form of decentralization and bottom up, these technical terms, then we're trying to do the same thing.
Thank you very much, Parminder. I'd like now to move to the next round, and I would like to ask our speakers to be very concrete on their comments. On this workshop that we had yesterday, we were commenting that one side effect of minilateral or plurilateral ways of discussing public policy and standards such as OECD and the Council of Europe and the Commission and different initiatives is that some of these groups become exporters of standards. And sometimes you have to have one table around which each of these initiatives will sit and will dialogue, otherwise it will fragment. And I would like to ask our speakers if they believe that enhanced cooperation would be a way to build the bridges between these different initiatives, if this is what they have in mind. And the ones of you that have spoken about making decisions, how would you make decisions? Would this be a body? Could you be more concrete on your proposals? And I would like to start with Romulo, please.
Well, we don't know yet what's enhanced cooperation, really. And we are in the very path to find out and to discuss internally what it would be, what it should be. I liked very much the Juan's analogy with the map, because drawing this map, maybe we can find a place to this enhanced cooperation institution, or maybe we could find the solution or the conclusion that the enhanced cooperation would be this map, would be this kind of integration system of the existing bodies with some change. I don't know. I really don't know. I'm being very sincere with you. We are searching for it within the Brazilian government, and I hope to have at least a proposal in the very next future.
Thank you, and thank you for being so fast and concise. I'd like to give the floor to Andrea, so you can comment a little bit on these different initiatives, especially in Europe. We have different initiatives in Europe. How are you making efforts to bridge them?
We don't. I'm joking, of course. Now, in Europe, we have a tradition of trying many different things all at once until the best one emerges. But jokes aside, I would tend to think that in Europe, there is the work being conducted by the Council of Europe, which, as I'm sure all of you know, but I'm bound contractually to repeat it every time, is a different organization than the European Union. They are having their own initiative on principles related to the cross-border nature of the internet. Then the European Commission, or more precisely Commissioner Kroes, Vice President of the European Commission, has recently highlighted her vision of what the internet, in her opinion, should look like, and what successful policy for the internet, which elements should it contain, and that is the Internet Compact that Marilia mentioned, and very briefly, an internet that should be of civic responsibilities, not only of legal, but also civic and social responsibilities. One, unfragmented internet. This is extremely important for us, with a multi-stakeholder process, which is transparent, and that is, again, very important for us, which is pro-democracy, which is architecturally sound, and this relates to the technical policy link that I mentioned, and it should inspire confidence and trust. Now, how can we, I think the question is, how do we make all these initiatives, because besides Council of Europe, European Commission, you have G8, OECD principles, you have many different regional principles coming up. There is obviously a risk of fragmentation, this is clear. On the other hand, it seems to me that we are in a moment in which every single region of the world, not only public authorities, but especially public authorities, are trying, by a new setting these principles, are trying to put on the table their vision, securely, absolutely surely in our case, in order to engage in a discussion, to get comments. By the way, we had an open forum here at the IGF on the Internet Compact, which was unfortunately very poorly attended, and that was really unfortunate because we wanted to have the comments on the IGF participants on our ideas. But what I meant to say is that it is dangerous to, when you are at the beginning of different ideas coming up, it is dangerous to immediately want to reduce them to one single vision, because that tends to, most of the times, that tends to get to a very low-level minimum common denominator if you are in a rush to find a consensus about something. And that I don't think it would be appropriate. Whether enhanced cooperation can help in that process or not, but to be absolutely honest, I think that first we should agree on what enhanced cooperation is, and then we can, which kind of processes does that actually entail, which kind of participants, because I can say that, for example, if enhanced cooperation is only about, about discussions only between governments or public authorities, then I don't think that we would be that much interested to discuss our Internet Compact there, because we believe that multiple participants and stakeholder groups should have an input in the discussion. But again, I'm afraid that until we decide we have some more clarity on what enhanced cooperation means, we at the Commission will continue to engage with other partners, whether the public authorities, whether they're private sector, civil society, etc. And just if I may conclude by, we try to be as transparent as possible, but the fact that we don't publicize on our main web page that we have spoken to country X or Y or Z or to stakeholder X, Y, Z does not necessarily mean that we have not done it. But sometimes there are certain discussions, which quite frankly, as I think happens normally in all human life, you don't necessarily publicize right on. First you try to build a bit of trust, etc., and then you go public with the discussion that you're having.
Thank you, Andrea. I'd like to hear from Parminder now, and Jovan has been quiet for a while, so I'd like to make some comments next.
Okay, what is enhanced cooperation? And Andrea said we are not clear, so I think let's move from what is clear to the less clear parts. Enhanced cooperation is, I mean, we can understand a thing from its function and then probably think about the structure. And the function of enhanced cooperation is to address global internet-related public policy issues. There is an understanding in Tunis agenda that there are many global internet public policy issues which need a global response are not being addressed. That was in 2005. In 2011, there are many more, and there is a good indication that they could keep on increasing in a geometric proportion. And these issues need a global response. So whatever addresses that would be enhanced cooperation. So we can settle here and say it's already being addressed, then that's happening. We can say it's not being addressed and needs to be addressed in a manner, and that would then be enhanced cooperation. Now, I'm coming back to an earlier point which was being made about this, all this good sounding words, bottom up, distributed, etc., etc. So which side should we go towards from now? And I remember in India, somebody saying this about that there's no absolute truth. And he gave a very good example that what's the right thing to tell to a child. And he said, if the child spends too much time in games and playing and all, then you tell him, you should study more. But there's another child who spends all the time in library and studying, and you tell him you should play more games. So none of the recommendations has its intrinsically true, but it's relative to the situation where we are. And in that regard, in internet governance, we need to make our decisions relative to the situation we are. Are we too decentralized, fragmented, too lack of clarity about who controls, or are we too centralized and therefore we have to decentralize? And my view is that right now we need some kind of a better hold of what's happening and a better point where the public interest could be negotiated in a networked form, taking into account the role of very many different bodies. Yes. So I need to wrap up. Okay. So I would say let's go over areas of agreement. We agree that there are public policy issues. They are not being addressed right now. And when somebody said that why should we go towards these kind of convergences, the question I often ask is, I have seen in OECD, I have seen in EU, I have seen in COE, there is a convergence of the specialized internet-related issues. There are new forms, new bodies, new structures within these intergovernmental, governmental, institutional forms to go towards a digital agenda, information society division, internet policy-related divisions, and these, some of them have been set up lately. So that, I think, is a good proof that you need some kind of a structure to converge these. And if that is so for a certain group of countries, I think it's true for all of us together. And in that sense, I think we have already the IGF, which should be a huge participative body, and no other structure in OECD, etc., has an IGF kind of structure. This should be a place where the agenda shaping takes place, which is authoritatively communicated to this new body, which I think is needed. And that should be hugely participative, because nowhere else does a multi-stakeholder space with thousands of people attending actually shape agenda and authoritatively hands over that agenda and policy options to a policy making body. Now, what would be that structure of that body? First, if we reach up to this point that we need that body, what would be the structure of the body? What would be its networked relationship with other bodies? It's something open, and we can keep discussing it. But I think we should first cross the layers we agree on and reach that point. Yes, we need it, but we don't agree on the structure. And then if we reach here and are only talking about that, I think agreement should be possible. Thank you.
I'd like to give the floor to Tulika because she needs to leave, and then to Jovan and finish with Marcus. And if you can stay for a little while more, maybe 10 minutes more, we can take some questions in the end. Okay.
Thank you, Marilia. I don't know what this would seem to most of you. We started with discussions on governance of internet. And today, we have arrived at a position where we're talking about governance of the institutions and the mechanisms who are managing internet. And this would be something that we need to keep in mind when we start to talk about a new body which would function as an oversight for internet governance. So whether we're looking for a body that will only focus on the techno-public policy global issues of internet governance, focus on that and see that those issues are covered, or we're looking for a body which is having an oversight function to govern the institutions and the mechanisms and the public policy making institutions into responding to the global requirements of internet vis-a-vis what we are all seeking to discuss. So that I feel should be the base for us if we're looking for a new body to look at internet governance, or a new body for governance of institutions that are managing internet. That is my parting message that I leave with you people. I apologize because I need to go to the main session now. I cannot be late there. Thank you so much for being patient and listening to me so much. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tulika, for being here with us. I'd like to give the floor to Jovan, please.
Andrea inspired me to introduce new principle or to adjust the existing one of transparency. Maybe we'll need a principle of translucency where we can see that something is going on, but till the moment when it is ready, it obviously has to become transparent. I'm coming from the country which as Bismarck said, produce more history than it can consume, and I'm very careful when it comes to revolutions, and that's probably in the genetical code and in my personal experience that evolution is always better. It takes care of complexity, as Juan said, and IG internet is extremely complex. And it also brings real understanding about interests and views of different players. Now, having said that, I'm not going to reveal what will be on our future building. I will leave it as some sort of surprise element. But probably the key word is that in order to remain the same, when I say to remain the same in positive sense, to have the key principles of internet governance upheld, we have to change. And that change has to reflect what has happened in the world over the last 6 to 7 years since IGF was established. And this is reality in our surrounding. And one of the issue which is coming, which is in a way writing on the wall, is that there is a need to address public policy issue. In what way, how, where is, as Parminder said, the important question. But it would be definitely a lost opportunity if we fail to enhance Internet Governance Forum and keep it vital and important role as a place where vibrancy of Internet governance community can be articulated. And if we allow that this request for change goes into some other place outside this multi-stakeholder and vibrant space. Therefore, yes, in order to remain the same, to have the Internet Governance Forum as highly functional, respectable, we have to change. And those changes are change that we will be discussed in the CSTD context, and I don't think the differences are that big. If you look at the internet principles, they converge in many respects among the different players. Again, we come to the perception, and perception is so powerful in politics, and sometimes if we can step back and see to increase the reality and reduce the perception noise, which is not easy, we, I think, can come to a really good and functional solution for the strengthen the IGF as a real body where vibrancy of the internet community can be kept, while in the same time public policy issue could be addressed. Thank you.
Thank you, Jovan, for the thoughts that we'll certainly take home. And now, Marcos?
Thank you. Yes, I think I agree with much what's being said, and the reference to the OECD, again going back to the discussions in WIGIG, which was in many ways the role model for the IGF. We thought it would be good to have something like the OECD on a global scale. However, we have to realize it was almost impossible, it is impossible to create such an important organization, transform it to a global role. It was more the function we looked at, and the fact that the OECD is actually very interested and very active in the IGF is no coincidence, because we follow a lot of their working methods on exchanging information, on sharing best practices, on trying to build convergence through bottom-up discussions. Yes, sadly, we don't have the resources to replicate the work of the OECD. That is a fact. But the general idea behind the IGF is precisely that. Now, looking at all the various articles negotiated, we should not forget these were negotiated compromise documents. The language is always negotiated. It's not something we have to take. Yes, we have to take it seriously, but quite often it is aspirational. It's something we should work towards, but it's almost then impossible to implement. Tulika made a few very good points. I think the IGF and all these points you made, especially coordination with other organizations, yes, the IGF did not go that far, but to begin with, you should never forget the IGF is not an organization. It was set up as a mandate was given to the Secretary General to convene a forum, and that's extremely light. And to think that such a forum could coordinate other very well-established, important organization is just impossible. I recall the anecdote. It was a senior colleague from UNESCO who said everybody is in favor of coordination, but nobody likes to be coordinated. And this is the crux of the matter. But the fact is, people from these organizations attend meetings at the IGF, and they do listen, and they go home, they get maybe ideas. I mean, I mentioned the workshop yesterday. The WIPO was here, and they listened to the diversity of views expressed. Now let's see whether they, in their own work, also will increase the diversity of views expressed in WIPO. So the takeaway from the IGF is not so much that the IGF can actually tell people to do something, but can inspire them to do something. The same enhanced cooperation, that was a negotiated compromise language, and I agree with Andrea. As long as we don't have clarity or a consensus on what we understand with it, it's very difficult to move forward. Nitin Desai, immediately afterwards, did comprehensive consultations on this, and he concluded, I don't understand what it means. Everybody sees something different in it, and that was precisely the success. Because everybody saw something different on it, negotiators in Tunis could agree on it. They had what they wanted, but it's not a clear picture of what it is. Now we have the two views. Are they two separate tracks, the enhanced cooperation and the IGF, and the General Assembly says so, but others sees it as basically they're absolutely related tracks, and the IGF in itself embodies enhanced cooperation because people talk to each other and come here, communicate, listen to each other, and then go home and maybe do something differently than they would have done otherwise. But certainly we can, I think, safely say that now, 6 years after Tunis, organizations interact more and better than they did when in Tunis, and I think the IGF has contributed to this, I think, improved situation when it comes to an international dialogue on internet governance.
Thank you very much, Marcus. As someone who follows WIPO, I'm really looking forward to see more views of the IGF reflected on that environment. And Andrea, I would like to make a very, very brief point. 30 seconds, Andrea.
Even less, just the reference that Marcus made as the OECD as a model for the IGF, kind of a model for the IGF, struck me because the OECD, not being strictly speaking a decision-making body, it's more a think tank for, well, some say for rich countries, but in any case, it's a think tank. It is anyway very influential through, for example, its guidelines. For example, the guidelines on information security, the guidelines on business governance. Those texts are not binding texts. They're not law, but they are hugely influential in the way that then they percolate through the laws and regulation at regional and national level. So the question, if the OECD the OECD was a model for the IGF, then shouldn't also the IGF find a way to produce something closer to the OECD guidelines, understanding the IGF is not negotiating, blah, blah, blah. But the point is that, quite frankly, in a close, something must come out of this. Otherwise, it's especially, I think, not only for public authorities, it can become challenging to continue going on mission for a long period of time, and also to explain to our families why we disappear for 1 week if nothing comes out of this.
Thank you very much, Andrea. Well, we have 5 minutes on our time extension here. I'd like to know if anyone has some burning issues they would like to raise. Maybe we can do a back and forth again, but please.
My name is Alex Gakuru. I'm from Kenya. One of the things I have noticed is an entrapping schema that has proposed that you either do you support a private sector-led internet or do you support a government-led? I think this comparison is mute, it's not valid, because I think it just already creates silos of trying to say, is it government or private sector? And when you look at private sector, anyway, the interests there are extremely private. Public policy is not an issue. It's not their priority, and they are least democratic in terms of that. So a balance, if I could pick a situation or case where you find too much of one thing is dangerous, too much of private control of the internet is dangerous, just as maybe excessive government control. So I do think the tensions that exist between government and control and maybe like ICANN private control are a good thing. I would like us, or maybe comments from the panel, to contrast the participation at IGF meetings with the much praised ICANN, and contrast or IETF, where the public policy, public interest is the overriding thing in those meetings, or even IETF, vis-a-vis IGF, which focus on public interest. Because the commercial control, commercial interest within some of these other organizations, they do have an upper hand. So let's not have institutions that have got the usual suspects, technical folk who speak in tongues, over 10 years experience is when you qualify to speak, and then they say they are open, but indeed they are actually exclusive. So we must also not praise those institutions so much as the perfect models when you know IGF gives everybody a voice. Compare the participation and you'll see it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. One more. Anyone else want to raise? Craig, please.
Thank you. I'm Craig Riley. I work for the U.S. government. In today's connected world, we're used to immediate responses on the internet. We can all ask different questions, search for different information, and use the internet in different ways and achieve different levels of success based on what we're looking for. The current model of international public policy is not that way. It's slow, it's messy, there's individual interests, there's winners and losers, and it's slow. So in this connected world, there was a lot of talk about what kind of results do we want. Can we accept uneven results? As long as the trend in these institutions is towards greater openness, multi-stakeholder, more inclusiveness, of which the IGF provides the perfect model for this. What we don't understand is why would we want to reverse this trend in this model that has been multi-stakeholder by implementing some decision-making process that would be binding and try to direct specific global outcomes. And we don't think it's a good idea. Well, we don't think it's a good idea, and we don't think it's actually possible to do it, and it would ruin essentially the perfect model we have of this multi-stakeholder collaborative method that other institutions can then take example from. Thank you.
Romulo would like to speak. I'd like to make just a very brief question for Craig, taking the opportunity that you are here. US is one of the actors that is developing principles. Are you willing to interact with other initiatives that are developing principles? And where do you envision that this interaction should take place in order to agree a set of, do you think that it's feasible to agree on a set of frameworks, of principles for the internet?
I have a very brief, oh, sorry.
Yeah. In fact, this is a great deal of discussion across the U.S. Government, and there are a lot of these principles out there, of which some of them present good models that can be acted on. As a nation, of course, the U.S. government will determine its principles, but there is a role and there is an opportunity to consider other principles that are out there, and we have also joined other organizations in trying to determine other principles. So it's kind of mixed. It's kind of like the IGF itself. We're doing our own, and we're also collaborating with other organizations to do it. And see, this is why I say this model of the IGF, which has been successful and encourages this cooperation, collaboration on a number of levels is a good model that I think we want to continue into the future. Thank you.
Well, we have no time, so very quick.
Very quick, Craig. Well, in your evaluation, IGF is just perfect. Maybe in the evaluation of the other actors, we could really improve the IGF role in this system, not just putting some binding decisions here, but maybe redistributing the legitimacy or the participation, or improving the participation of developing countries, even from the civil society of developing countries. I'd like to give you just an example. 2 days ago or 3 days ago, very fast, Marilia, I just had an interview with ICC representatives. It was a good interview, but it was a little bit funny because I was in a place and 20 representatives of ICC was in front of me, asking me questions. This is a normal dialogue, but I asked them, have you ever been, any of you have ever been in this such situation with 20 representatives of the civil society asking you, Facebook, what are your intention? What are your plans? What are your plan of action? Or Cisco or somewhere, somebody else from a company. So there are different roles here in the IGF. Maybe we could redistribute it. You could reorganize it, just that. Or maybe we could have outcomes report. It's not binding, but it's visible.
Okay, any other panelists would like to make a point? Okay, really quick.
Okay, I mean, a lot of people said we can't engage with enhanced cooperation because we don't know what enhanced cooperation is. And I mean, this is like that egg and chicken thing, because we need to start defining that, and then simultaneously engage with it. So it's we who are going to tell what enhanced cooperation is and then engage with it. On that point also, what Marcus said, that is the IGF itself enhanced cooperation. And I remember the early days of IGF, and Marcus would also remember them, when the establishment within the IGF was very clear that enhanced cooperation is outside, so much so that there were problems even of discussing enhanced cooperation within the IGF. And therefore, these early days, it was clear that it is a public policy addressing mechanism. Craig said, why do we want to reverse this trend? And I don't think, for example, India proposal of IGF improvement is to strengthen the IGF completely, make it deeper, more participative. And I don't think to, even if a possible moving towards a body which receives the outcomes and does something with them, is in a way reversing the trend. I think there would be more people here if they knew that what they're going to contribute is going in some direction to influence real policies. And on OECD, I thought I heard first time that OECD was a model which was discussed while the IGF was evolving, yeah, and I agree with Andrea that it's non-binding, but we also know that most of the UN is non-binding. I mean, people sign all kinds of things and go back in the countries and do what they wish to do. So I don't see why that kind of a thing cannot be done. The OECD model of policy evolving at the top, there is a council which is very intergovernmental, and I don't know why people don't ask them why OECD is intergovernmental and why a UN intergovernmental system is so bad. Why can't we have that kind of arrangement in the UN, make it more multi-stakeholder, and then come out with the kind of outcomes OECD comes out with, which are not binding really. I mean, the countries can go back and be under some moral pressure, but not really binding. So that's the kind of thing we are looking at as being the enhanced cooperation process. Thank you.
Andrea.
Thank you. Hoping to be as brief as possible, trying to be as brief as possible. What strikes me is in many of the discussions, not only in this discussion, but in many others that I had, is how much, in my opinion, people tend to focus so much on the past. At the WSIS, this was said, this was decided. In the past 5 years, the IGF or other organizations have been good. I mean, one can have different opinions on that, but have been good or less good, etc. But the reality is that we have to look at the future. And the internet of today, the importance that the internet has today is uncomparable to the importance that it had in 2005. And without wanting to open a very delicate topic, you just have to see at how many countries are developing cyber war strategies. Now, when the military in a country starts to get really interested in a technology or in a phenomenon, it means that the phenomenon is quite serious, socially speaking. Now, the question becomes, instead of, my personal suggestion, instead of focusing on what the particular paragraph 122, linear 2, word 7 says, let's try for a moment to focus on what we can practically get out of the IGF, which we as the Commission believe still has much value, considering that the time has changed. And I think it's, with all due respect to our friends from the US, you can't just keep it as it is. This is simply not sustainable. And whether we agree or not that with all the position of our colleagues from India, Brazil, South Africa, other countries, there is a clear pressure to just try, there is a clear signals that there are some important parts of the world, democratic parts of the world, I would add, which is not true for some of the other proposals that are coming through, that are clearly calling for a discussion on how we can make the IGF more productive. And I understand the fears, we understand very well the fears of not turning this into another intergovernmental circus, quite frankly. We don't want that, we don't like that. And we are aware of the, I get Parminder's point, that there is maybe a bit of hypocrisy when you compare some organizations to others. They're both intergovernmentals, but some are better than others anyway. And yet one has to be practical. If you bring discussions in certain contexts which historically have not been very close to a multi-stakeholder involvement, there are risks there. And therefore, what we are suggesting, what we would suggest is, let's try to be practical. Let's try to identify issues and parts of the IGF that can be made better, whether in the structure of the IGF, whether producing some kind of tangible output out of this discussion. Because the reality, we had 6 IGF. We had 6 IGF. Do we have pieces of paper which are widely distributed, widely read by decision makers, which summarize the results, the discussions of the IGF? I know we had the reports on the IGF website, thanks to the good work of Markus Kummer and of his team back at the time. But are these things read by those that take decisions? What can we do to ensure that these results, whether you call them guidelines, outcomes, recommendation, doesn't matter in this context, are actually read by those people? Because right now, I am not convinced they are. And as long as we continue, and I'm closing, as long as we continue to simply put a wall saying, no, the IGF has to stay as it is, I had to say that sooner or later, the political, in my personal view, the political pressure will become such that whether we want it or not, something else will come up. And we really run the risk of losing the good sides of what we have here. If you don't change when the world around you changes, then the world around you is going to change you, sometimes in directions that you don't like. Thank you.
Just a two quick comments. One is, we're discussing digital world with the 1 and zeros, but we shouldn't use digital logic. It's not either or. We should use analog logic, and we should see that there are many possible solutions. It doesn't mean that we have to draft the next treaty on internet governance. There are many possibilities how we can enhance the IGF and make it relevant. And I'll give you one example. Yesterday we had a session on e-participation, and we drafted e-participation principles. Basically what we did, we codified experience over the last 6 years in e-participation process. Obviously it's not it's politically non-controversial issue, but we have one page with collective wisdom, which is now open for online discussion. And over next few months, we will have a non-binding bottom-up summary of main e-participation principles. This is concrete outcome that could be distributed, which is already consulted by some UN agencies. And this is one example how we can develop that analog approach, not digital approach, to the possible enhancement of the Internet Governance Forum. Thank you.
Yeah, I don't want to sort of be seen as a guy who's clinging on to the past, but sometimes it is useful just to look back a little bit where we come from. Right at the beginning, the first IGF, there was an enormous amount of angst. A discussion we had in the multi-stakeholder advisory group, you cannot possibly have more than 6 workshops because of the capture and whatever. In the end, we filled all the rooms we had at our disposal, at 36 workshops in Athens, and that has moved on as a sort of bottom-up input into the discussions. And for the past 3 IGFs, I think there are about 100 workshops. The first IGF, there were fears. We cannot possibly have anything coming out of it. Chairman summary, no way. The Secretariat produced the Secretariat summary. It was considered okay. From Rio onwards, we had chairman's summaries as an outcome of the meeting, which are fairly comprehensive in summing up, also in summing up commonalities, saying on this point of view there was an emerging consensus that this would be a way forward. Last year, for the first time, our host country transmitted the chairman's summary to the Secretary General of the United Nations with the request to make it available as an official document to the General Assembly. But of course, nobody can force governments to read documents that are put in front of them. But the fact is that over the years, I think what began as a very shaky experiment in multi-stakeholder cooperation has gained credibility, and more people come and listen to it. And there are other organizations that look at the processes. In terms of process, I think we are by far advanced in a UN framework, in engaging stakeholders, in trying, in fomenting discussion among different stakeholders, relevant stakeholder groups, and it is being taken seriously. People do send important colleagues to this meeting. I mean, I see Deputy Director General from the European Commission is listening here, so it is being taken seriously. And yes, of course, it will evolve, and it has evolved. Every meeting was different from another, and taking on further steps. That is a natural, I think, evolution of the IGF. People are also a little bit more relaxed. There's, I think, a little bit less fear of capture, but when I did say the OECD was a role model, of course, a role model only in terms of the function of looking at case studies, of sharing best practices, but obviously we knew the IGF would not be an intergovernmental organization that provides a framework for negotiating guidelines and whatever. But yes, we thought we would be able to discuss these issues, and we can, of course, build on that and move it further. I think the IGF by now has proved that it is resilient enough to survive. More people than ever came here to Nairobi, and this is a very good basis to build on for the future.
Thank you very much, Marcus. I'd like to thank all our speakers and to thank you for being here, for your participation, for your patience, and thank the next workshop organizers as well for being patient with us. Thank you.
We can clap for ourselves.